All right. Welcome to another Sadler storytelling where I'm going to go through one of my favorite short stories. This time we're looking at a short story that's about 10 pages or so by Philip K. Dick, and it's called Human Is. I've got it here in the collected stories. This particular volume, it's like a 6 volume set. So you can find it online. It's linked to below, so you can easily read along with the story if you want to, or go check it out yourself. And what I particularly like about this story is that it, in a very droll way, exhibits a kind of ethical situation, a dilemma that this particular there's really two characters who face it. Jill Herrick is one of them, and if I remember right, it's her yeah, it's her brother who is raising the issue as well, and they're both posed with this question about what do you do with somebody who seems to be an alien, a replica of a person who you knew and who was kind of a jerk, not a very good person at all. It's a new and improved version, and technically you're not supposed to like that fake person, but the fake person is better than the original. So let's get started. With no further ado, here is Philip K. Dick's story, Human Is. Jill Herrick's blue eyes filled with tears. She gazed at her husband in unspeakable horror. "You're hideous," she wailed. Lester Herrick continued working, arranging heaps of notes and graphs in precise piles. "Hideous," he stated, "is a value judgment. It contains no factual information." He sent a report tape on Centurion parasitic life whizzing through the desk scanner. "Merely an opinion, an expression of emotion, nothing more." Jill stumbled back to the kitchen. Listlessly, she waved her hand to trip the stove into activity. Conveyor belts in the wall hummed to life, hurrying the food from the underground storage lockers for the evening meal. She turned to face her husband one last time. "Not even a little while," she begged. "Not even?" "Not even for a month. When he comes, you can tell him. If you haven't the courage, I'll do it. I can't have a child running around here. I have too much work to do. This report on Beetlejuice 11 is due in 10 days. Lester dropped a spool on Formalhauten fossil implements into the scanner. "What's the matter with your brother? Why can't he take care of his own child?" Jill dabbed at swollen eyes. "Don't you understand? I want Gus here. I begged Frank to let him come. And now you—" "I'll be glad when he's old enough to be turned over to the government." Lester's thin face twisted in annoyance. "Damn it, Jill, isn't dinner ready yet? It's been 10 minutes. What's wrong with that stove?" "It's almost ready." The stove showed a red signal light. The robot waiter had come out of the wall and was waiting expectantly to take the food. Jill sat down and blew her small nose violently. In the living room, Lester worked on unperturbed. His work, his research, day after day, Lester was getting ahead. There was no doubt of that. His lean body was bent like a coiled spring over the tape scanner, cold gray eyes taking in the information feverishly, analyzing, appraising, his conceptual faculties operating like well greased machinery. Jill's lips trembled in misery and resentment. Gus, little Gus, how could she tell him? Fresh tears welled up in her eyes. Never to see the chubby little fellow again. He could never come back because his childish laughter and play bothered Lester, interfered with his research. The stove clicked to green. The food slid out into the arms of the robot. Soft chimes sounded to announce dinner. "I hear it," Lester grated. He snapped off the scanner and got to his feet. "I suppose he'll come while we're eating." "I can vid Frank and ask." "No, might as well get it over with." Lester nodded impatiently to the robot. "All right, put it down." His thin lips set in an angry line. "Damn it, don't dawdle. I just want to get back to my work." Jill bit back the tears. Little Gus came trailing into the house as they were finishing dinner. Jill gave a cry of joy. Gussie! She ran to sweep him up in her arms. I'm so glad to see you. Watch out for my tiger, Gus muttered. He dropped his gray little kitten onto the rug and it rushed off under the couch. He's hiding. Lester's eyes flickered as he studied the little boy and the tip of gray tail extending from under the couch. Why do you call it a tiger? It's nothing but an alley cat. Gus looked hurt. He scowled. He's a tiger. He's got stripes. Tigers are yellow and a great deal bigger. You may as well learn to classify things by their correct names. Lester, please, Jill pleaded. Be quiet, her husband said crossly. Gus is old enough to shed childish illusions and develop a realistic orientation. What's wrong with the psych testers? Don't they straighten this sort of nonsense out? Gus ran and snatched up his tiger. You leave him alone. Lester contemplated the kitchen. A strange, cold smile played about his lips. Come down to the lab sometime, Gus. We'll show you lots of cats. We use them in our research. Cats, guinea pigs, rabbits. Lester, Jill gasped, how can you? Lester laughed thinly. Abruptly, he broke off and returned to his desk. Now clear out of here. I have to finish these reports and don't forget to tell Gus. Gus got excited. Tell me what? His cheeks flushed. His eyes sparkled. What is it? Something for me? A secret? Jill's heart was like lead. She put her hand heavily on the child's shoulder. Come on, Gus. We'll go sit out in the garden and I'll tell you, bring your tiger. A click. The emergency vid sender lit up. Instantly, Lester was on his feet. Be quiet. He ran to the sender, breathing rapidly. Nobody speak. Jill and Gus paused at the door. A confidential message was sliding from the slot into the dish. Lester grabbed it up and broke the seal. He studied it intently. What is it? Jill asked. Anything bad? Bad. Lester's face shone with a deep inner glow. No, not bad at all. He glanced at his watch. Just time. Let's see. I'll need. What is it? I'm going on a trip. I'll be gone 2 or 3 weeks. Rexnor 4 is into the charted area. Rexnor 4, you're going there? Jill clasped her hands eagerly. Oh, I've always wanted to see an old system, old ruins and cities. Lester, can I come along? Can I go with you? We never took a vacation and you always promised. Lester Herrick stared at his wife in amazement. You, he said, you go along? He laughed unpleasantly. Now, hurry and get my things together. I've been waiting for this for a long time. He rubbed his hands together in satisfaction. You can keep the boy here until I'm back, but no longer. Rexnor 4, I can hardly wait. You have to make allowances, Frank said. After all, he's a scientist. I don't care, Jill said. I'm leaving him. As soon as he gets back from Rexnor 4, I've made up my mind. Her brother was silent, deep in thought. He stretched his feet out onto the lawn of the little garden. Well, if you leave him, you'll be free to marry again. You're still classed as sexually adequate, aren't you? Jill nodded firmly. You bet I am. I wouldn't have any trouble. Maybe I can find someone who likes children. You think a lot of children, Frank perceived. Gus loves to go visit you, but he doesn't like Lester. Lester needles him. I know, this past week has been heaven with him gone. Jill patted her soft blonde hair, blushing prettily. I've had fun. Makes me feel alive again. When will he be back? Any day, Jill clenched her small fist. We've been married 5 years, and each year it's worse. He's so inhuman, utterly cold and ruthless. Him and his work, day and night. Les is ambitious. He wants to get to the top in his field. Frank lit a cigarette lazily. A pusher. Well, maybe he'll do it. What's he in? Toxicology. He works out new poisons for military. He invented the copper sulfate skin lime they used against Callisto. Well, it's a small field. Now take me. Frank leaned contentedly against the wall of the house. There are thousands of clearance lawyers. I could work for years and never create a ripple. I'm just content to be. I do my job. I enjoy it. I wish Lester felt that way. Well, maybe he'll change. He'll never change, Jill said bitterly. I know that now. That's why I've made up my mind to leave him. He'll always be the same. Lester Herrick came back from Rexnor 4, a different man. Beaming happily, he deposited his anti grav suitcase in the arms of the waiting robot. Thank you. Jill gasped speechlessly. Les, what? Lester moved his hat, bowing a little. Good day, my dear. You're looking lovely. Your eyes are clear and blue, sparkling like some virgin lake fed by mountain streams. He sniffed. Do I smell a delicious repast warming on the hearth? Oh, Lester, Jill blinked uncertainly, faint hope swelling in her bosom. Lester, what's happened to you? You're so different. Am I, my dear? Lester moved about the house, touching things and sighing. What a dear little house, so sweet and friendly. You don't know how wonderful it is to be here. Believe me. I'm afraid to believe it, Jill said. Believe what? That you mean all this, that you're not the way you were, the way you've always been. What way is that? Mean and cruel. I. Lester frowned, rubbing his lip. Interesting. He brightened. Well, that's all in the past. What's for dinner? I'm faint with hunger. Jill eyed him uncertainly as she moved into the kitchen. Anything you want, Lester. You know our stove covers the maximum select list. Of course, Lester coughed rapidly. Well, shall we try sirloin steak, medium smothered in onions with mushroom sauce and white rolls with hot coffee, perhaps ice cream and apple pie for dessert? You never seem to care much about food, Jill said thoughtfully. Oh? You always said you hoped eventually they'd make intravenous intake universally applicable. She studied her husband intently. Lester, what's happened? Nothing at all. Lester carelessly took his pipe out and lit it rapidly, somewhat awkwardly. Bits of tobacco drifted to the rug. He bent nervously down and tried to pick them up again. Please go about your tasks and don't mind me. Perhaps I can help you prepare. That is, can I do anything to help? No, Jill said. I can do it. You go ahead with your work if you want. Work? Your research into toxins. Toxins, Lester showed confusion. Well, for heaven's sakes, toxins, devil take it. What, dear? I mean, I really feel too tired just now. I'll work later. Lester moved vaguely around the room. I think I'll just sit and enjoy being home again. Off that awful Rexner 4. Was it awful? Horrible. A spasm of disgust crossed Lester's face. Dry and dead, ancient, squeezed to a pulp by wind and sun. A dreadful place, my dear. I'm sorry to hear that. I always wanted to visit it. Heaven forbid, Lester cried feelingly. You stay right here, my dear, with me, the two of us. His eyes wandered around the room. Two, yes, Terra is a wonderful planet, moist and full of life. He beamed happily. Just right. I don't understand it, Jill said. Repeat all the things you remember, Frank said. His robot pencil poised itself alertly. The changes you've noticed in him, I'm curious. Why? No reason. Go on. You said you sensed it right away, that he was different? I noticed it at once, the expression on his face, not that hard, practical look, a sort of mellow look, relaxed, tolerant, a sort of calmness. I see, Frank said. What else? Jill peered through the back door into the house. He can't hear us, can he? No, he's inside playing with Gus in the living room. They're Venusian ottermen today. Your husband built an otter slide down at his lab. I saw him unwrapping it. His talk. His what? The way he talks, his choice of words he never used before, whole new phrases, metaphors. I never heard him use a metaphor in all our 5 years together. He said metaphors were inexact, misleading, and what? The pencil scratched busily. And they're strange words, old words you don't hear anymore. Archaic phraseology? Frank asked tensely. Yes, Jill paced back and forth across the small lawn, her hands in the pockets of her plastic shorts. Formal words like something out of a book? Exactly. You've noticed it? I noticed it. Frank's face was grim. Go on. Jill stopped pacing. What's on your mind? Do you have a theory? I want to know more facts, she reflected. He plays with Gus. He plays and jokes, and he eats. Didn't he eat before? Not like he does now. He loves food. He goes into the kitchen and tries endless combinations. He and the stove get together and cook up all sorts of weird things. I thought he'd put on weight. He's gained 10 pounds. He eats, smiles, and laughs. He's constantly polite. Jill glanced away coyly. He's even romantic. He always said that was irrational. And he's not interested in his work, his research into toxins. I see. Frank chewed his lip. Anything more? One thing puzzles me very much. I've noticed it again and again. What is it? He seems to have strange lapses of a burst of laughter. Lester Herrick, eyes bright with merriment, came rushing out of the house, little Gus close behind. We have an announcement, Lester cried. An announcement, Gus echoed. Frank folded up his notes and slid them into his coat pocket. The pencil hurried after them. He got slowly to his feet. Well, what is it? You make it, Lester said, taking little Gus's hand and leading him forward. Gus's plump face screwed up in concentration. I'm going to come live with you, he stated, anxiously watched Jill's expression. Lester says I can. Can I? Can I, Aunt Jill? Her heart flooded with incredible joy. She glanced from Gus to Lester. Do you really mean it? Her voice was almost inaudible. Lester put his arm around her, holding her close to him. Of course we mean it, he said gently. His eyes were warm and understanding. We wouldn't tease you, my dear. No teasing, Gus shouted excitedly. No more teasing. He and Lester and Jill drew close together. Never again. Frank stood a little way off, his face grim. Jill noticed him and broke away abruptly. What is it? She faltered. Is anything? When you're quite finished, Frank said to Lester Herrick, I'd like you to come with me. A chill clutched at Jill's heart. What is it? Can I come too? Frank shook his head. He moved towards Lester ominously. Come on, Herrick. Let's go. You and I are going to take a little trip. The three federal clearance agents took up positions a few feet from Lester Herrick, vibro tubes gripped alertly. Clearance Director Douglas studied Herrick for a long time. You're sure? He said finally. Absolutely, Frank stated. When did he get back from Rexer 4? A week ago. And the change was noticeable at once? His wife noticed as soon as she saw him. There's no doubt it occurred on Rexner. Frank paused significantly. And you know what that means. I know. Douglas walked slowly around the seated man, examining him from every angle. Lester Herrick sat quietly, his coat neatly folded across his knee. He rested his hands on his ivory-tipped cane, his face calm and expressionless. He wore a soft gray suit, a subdued necktie, French cuffs, and a shiny black shoes. He said nothing. Their methods are simple and exact, Douglas said. The original psychic contents are removed and stored in some kind of suspension. The interjection of the substitute contents is instantaneous. Lester Herrick was probably poking around the Rexnor City ruins, ignoring the safety precautions, shield or manual screen, and they got him. The seated man stirred. I'd very much like to communicate with Jill, he murmured. She surely is becoming anxious. Frank turned away, his face choked with revulsion. God, it's still pretending. Director Douglas restrained himself with the greatest effort. It's certainly an amazing thing. No physical changes. You could look at it and never know. He moved towards the seated man, his face hard. Listen to me, whatever you call yourself. Can you understand what I say? Of course, Lester Herrick answered. Did you really think you'd get away with it? We caught the others, the ones before you, all 10 of them, even before they got here. Douglas grinned coldly. Vibro rayed them one after another. The color left Lester Herrick's face. Sweat came out on his forehead. He wiped it away with a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket. Oh, he murmured. You're not fooling us. All Terra is alerted for you Rexorians. I'm surprised you got off Rexor at all. Herrick must have been extremely careless. We stopped the others aboard ship, fried them out in deep space. Herrick had a private shift, the seated man murmured. He bypassed the check station going in. No record of his arrival existed. He was never checked. Fry it, Douglas grated. The three clearance agents lifted their tubes, moving forward. No, Frank shook his head. We can't. It's a bad situation. What do you mean? Why can't we? We fried the others. They were caught in deep space. This is Terra. Terran law, not military law, applies. Frank waved towards the seated man, and it's in a human body. It comes under regular civil laws. We've got to prove it's not Lester Herrick, that it's a Rexorian infiltrator. It's going to be tough, but it can be done. How? His wife, Herrick's wife, her testimony. Jill Herrick can assert the difference between Lester Herrick and this thing. She knows, and I think we can make it stand up in court. It was late afternoon. Frank drove his surface cruiser slowly along. Neither he nor Jill spoke. So that's it, Jill said at last. Her face was gray, her eyes dry and bright without emotion. I knew it was too good to be true. She tried to smile. It seemed so wonderful. I know, Frank said. It's a terrible damn thing. If only. Why? Jill said. Why did he do this? Why did it take Lexer's body? Rexor 4 is old, dead, a dying planet. Life is dying out. I remember now. It said something like that, something about Rexor, that it was glad to get away. The Rexorians are an old race. The few that remain are feeble. They've been trying to migrate for centuries, but their bodies are too weak. Some tried to migrate to Venus and died instantly. They worked out this system about a century ago. But it knows so much about us. It speaks our language. Not quite. The changes you mentioned, the odd diction. You see, the Rexorians have only a vague knowledge of human beings, a sort of ideal abstraction taken from Terran objects that have found their way to Rexor. Books, mostly. Secondary data like that. The Rexorian idea of Terra is based on centuries-old Terran literature, romantic novels from our past, language, custom, manners from old Terran books. That accounts for the strange, archaic quality to it. It had studied Terra all right, but in an indirect and misleading way. Frank grinned wryly. The Rexorians are 200 years behind the times, which is a break for us. That's how we're able to detect them. Is this sort of thing common? Does it happen often? It seems unbelievable. Jill rubbed her forehead wearily. Dreamlike. It's hard to realize that it actually happened. I'm just beginning to understand what it means. Well, the galaxy is full of alien life forms, parasitic and destructive entities. Terran ethics don't extend to them. We have to guard constantly against this sort of thing. Lester went in unsuspectingly, and this thing ousted him and took over his body. Frank glanced at his sister. Jill's face was expressionless, a stern little face, wide-eyed but composed. She sat up straight, staring fixedly ahead, her small hands folded quietly in her lap. We can arrange it so you won't have to actually appear in court, Frank went on. You can vid a statement and it'll be presented as evidence. I'm certain your statement will do. The federal courts will help us all they can, but they have to have some evidence to go on. Jill was silent. What do you say? What happens after the court makes its decision? Then we vibro-ray it. Destroy the Rexorian mind. A Terran patrol ship on Rexor 4 sends out a party to locate the original contents. Jill gasped. She turned towards her brother in amazement. You mean? Oh, yes. Lester is alive in suspension somewhere on Rexor in one of the old city ruins. We'll have to force them to give him up. They won't want to, but they'll do it. They've done it before, and he'll be back with you, safe and sound, just like before. And this horrible nightmare you've been living will be a thing of the past. I see. Here we are. The cruiser pulled to a halt before the imposing federal clearance building. Frank got quickly out, holding the door for his sister. Jill stepped down slowly. Okay, Frank said. Okay. When they entered the building, clearance agents led them through the check screens. Down the long corridors, Jill's high heels echoed in the ominous silence. Quite a place, Frank observed. It's unfriendly. Considered a glorified police station, Frank halted. Before them was a guarded door. Here we are. Wait, Jill pulled back, her face twisting in panic. We'll wait until you're ready. Frank signaled to the clearance agent to leave. I understand it's a bad business. Jill stood for a moment, her head down. She took a deep breath. Her small fists clenched. Her chin came up, level and steady. All right. You ready? Yes. Frank opened the door. Here we are. Director Douglas and the three clearance agents turned expectantly as Jill and Frank entered. Good, Douglas murmured with relief. I was beginning to get worried. The sitting man got slowly to his feet, picking up his coat. He gripped his ivory headed cane tightly, his hands tense. He said nothing. He watched silently as the woman entered the room, Frank behind her. This is Mrs. Herrick, Frank said. Jill, this is Clearance Director Douglas. I've heard of you, Jill said faintly. Well, then you know our work. Yes, I know your work. This is an unfortunate business. It's happened before. I don't know what Frank has told you. He explained the situation. Good. Douglas was relieved. I'm glad of that. It's not easy to explain. You understand then what we want. The previous cases were caught in deep space. We vibrotubed them and got the original contents back. But this time we must work through legal channels. Douglas picked up a vid tape recorder. We will need your statement, Ms. Herrick. Since no physical change has occurred, we will have no direct evidence to make our case. We'll only have your testimony of character alteration to present to the court. He held the vid tape recorder out. Jill took it slowly. Your statement will undoubtedly be accepted by the court. The court will give us the release we want, and then we can go ahead. If everything goes correctly, we hope to be able to set up things exactly as they were before. Jill was gazing silently at the man standing in the corner with his coat and ivory-headed cane. Before, she said, what do you mean? Before the change. Jill turned towards Director Douglas. Calmly, she laid the vid tape recorder down on the table. What change are you talking about? Douglas paled. He licked his lips. All eyes in the room were on Jill. The change in him. He pointed at the man. Jill, Frank barked, what's the matter with you? He came quickly towards her. What the hell are you doing? You know damn well what change we mean. That's odd, Jill said thoughtfully. I haven't noticed any change. Frank and Director Douglas looked at each other. I don't get it, Frank muttered, dazed. Mrs. Herrick, Douglas began. Jill walked over to the man standing quietly in the corner. Can we go now, dear? She asked. She took his arm. Or is there some reason why my husband has to stay here? The man and woman walked silently along the dark street. Come on, Jill said. Let's go home. The man glanced at her. It's a nice afternoon, he said. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs. Spring is coming, I think, isn't it? Jill nodded. I wasn't sure. It's a nice smell, plants and soil and growing things. Yes. Are we going to walk? Is it far? Not too far. The man gazed at her intently, a serious expression on his face. I'm very indebted to you, my dear, he said. Jill nodded. I wish to thank you. I must admit I did not expect such a... Jill turned abruptly. What is your name? Your real name? The man's gray eyes flickered. He smiled a little, a kind, gentle smile. I'm afraid you would not be able to pronounce it. The sounds cannot be formed. Jill was silent as they walked along, deep in thought. The city lights were coming on all around them, bright yellow spots in the gloom. What are you thinking? The man asked. I was thinking perhaps I will still call you Lester, Jill said, if you don't mind. I don't mind, the man said. He put his arm around her, drawing her close to him. He gazed down tenderly as they walked through the thickening darkness between the yellow candles of light that marked the way. Anything you wish, whatever will make you happy. That's the end of Philip K. Dick's short story, Human Is, which you can find in various places, including this volume of the collected stories of Philip K. Dick, but also online. So this is a wonderful story. I really like it. I think you probably, a lot of you could kind of see the twist coming, so it's not a huge surprise, but it's really well done. I think it's a very funny story to see the authorities who are ready to vibro tube this Rex Norian alien into non-existence, brought up short. And I mean, what else is really great about this story? We get to see somebody, they don't undergo a moral transformation, for the better. Like, for example, Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, visited by the spirits and realizing he screwed up his life and he needs to change and be a better person. No, he's just replaced by somebody who turns out not to be a jerk, who's attentive, who's loving, who's caring, who wants to have children around, who's not interested in researching toxins, and who likes eating and experimenting, and who turns out to be a great companion for the female lead in this, as well as a great uncle to the child. We don't really know where Frank sits on this. This might screw things up a little bit between him and his sister Jill. But overall, I would say this is sort of something in the cosmic win column. So Red 00 Violet says, the cold pragmatism of "you're still sexually adequate" is very funny. Yeah, we're thinking about a future that Dick is envisioning where people are a lot less, what would we say, romantic about sexuality, perhaps. There's still romance there, right? But maybe less than we currently have in our time. So I'm curious, who here has read this story before and enjoyed it? Are there other themes to it that you think are particularly interesting? What would you do if you were in Jill's shoes? I mean, I know I would probably say, I'm keeping this one, and you know not turn him in. All right, Black and Blue Collar Reader. On my lunch break, saw this live. I started reading Philip K. Dick this year. I'm reading Scanner Darkly as we speak. Yeah, that is, at this point in time, my favorite Philip K. Dick story. Man in the High Castle used to be for a while, and then I kind of grabbed. I mean, I also really like Flow My Tears, the policeman said. Three Stigmata is an amazing one as well. And of course, the Android's Dream of Electric Sheep is great too. But a lot of people, I think, forget that Dick wrote all of these amazing short stories, because he basically was stuck in what you could call the sci-fi pulp ghetto. He you may not know this, but he did write some what are often called his realistic novels, like Milton Lumpke Territory or Confessions of a Crap Artist. And unfortunately, he couldn't get them published. They are published, but they were published years after he died, so he didn't get to see him in print and all that. So these science fiction stories, I mean, some of them are better than others, you could say. This is one that I particularly like. It's got kind of a light touch, as is often the case with Dick. He's not a super heavy-handed author. He's very imaginative. Black and Blue Collar Reader says Ubik and Do Androids Dream is the other ones that you're reading. Okay, well, yeah, Ubik is great too. And we already just talked about The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. So Black and Blue Collar Reader. I've heard of Philip K. Dick back in the 80s when his books were made into movies. I had no idea he wrote so many books and short stories. Yeah, he wrote a lot of novels, not all of which are as great as others, and some of which that like he was super into. I'm not as into, like, the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, even Valis, but he did write a lot of really great stuff and a lot of really great short stories. And, talking about, we could call them film and TV adaptations. So it's interesting. The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep very famously becomes the Blade Runner. And that's the first real commercial adaptation of his work. And it's done by Ridley Scott. And Dick, he could have gotten really mad because what Ridley Scott did with Blade Runner, although really cool, is definitely inferior to the novel The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep on a number of different points. It leaves out some really important not even background stuff, but we could call it like the structure of the world, and Dick recognized that and he said, this is not really an adaptation of my work. It's really its own thing. So we've got something that's set partly in a universe that I've created using characters, but it's doing something very, very different. So I think that was very gracious of Dick to look at things that way. And, there are a number of other film adaptations of Dick's stories. So, we can remember it for you wholesale. Of course, becomes and that comes out in the 80s as well, right? Or is it early 90s? The Arnold Schwarzenegger um, story, the art film set on Mars, Total Recall, right? And there's a number of other ones. A Scanner Darkly does get converted into that interesting rotoscope using film, and there's a number of other ones. Adjustment Day. Um, Trying to think of the others, but I'm having trouble recalling all of them to mind. Oh, Imposter, right? Gets turned into an entire movie with Gary Sinise. That's a short story. So, they're kind of hit and miss, but I think you can say that whenever you're working with Dick material, you got a lot to work with. It's just a question of how well you do in actually using the material. All right, so we got some more comments. Let me um, address those. Vadisgrad, it's kind of like H.G. Wells trying to branch. Oh yeah, trying to branch out of the sci-fi genre. Yet it's what people remember him for. Same with Arthur Conan Doyle with crime fiction. Yeah, Doyle actually kills off Sherlock Holmes, right? In what we could say turns out to be, I think, halfway through the series because he wants to do other stuff. And the fans effectively revolt, and he finds himself having to write additional Sherlock Holmes stories, although he's not really into it. I'll mention another interesting speculative fiction author who got himself in trouble with the estate of Arthur Conan Doyle, and that's August Derleth with his Solar Ponds detective things, where people read that and they're like, "Oh, this is essentially Sherlock Holmes, just Derlethian," and he got sued and unfortunately he didn't get in trouble for it, right? So that's kind of a cool feature. All right, Red 00 Violet, the Rexorian could actually appreciate being human. Yeah, okay, that's a great way of putting it. Lester, the original guy, took his humanity not only for granted but as something to be overcome, something to reject. And he not only rejects his own humanity, he rejects that of his wife, he rejects that of his nephew. So he's, the Rexorian, although, using weird language and probably at somewhat of a disadvantage, can make connections right away with Jill, can come home and be like, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you. It's wonderful to be here. Let's make some food together." And she can actually have the marriage and life together that she must have originally envisioned with this guy. I guess she probably thought that he would change over time. Red Violet says many people today focus too much on minutia, whether it be work or niche social groups on the internet. Yeah, it's a sort of lack of perspective that a lot of people suffer from, we could say, right? And very often we need other people to say, "Hey, man, you're screwing up. You got these things wrong." Occasionally, we need other people to say, as Jill was planning on doing, to say, "Listen, I'm not going to stick around for this. I'm going to leave you because you're acting like a jerk. You're not for me." And then maybe you can have one of those proverbial come to Jesus moments and be like, "Oh, I gotta change things," or you just stick with what you're used to and remain in your rut. James Mumford says, I remember when I finally read The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, I was surprised how different it was from Blade Runner. Yeah, me too. And I'll mention something from my past that I have talked about in other videos about Dick. I used to be rather standoffish with respect to Philip K. Dick, and Android's Dream of Electric Sheep was the game changer for me. So I would see all these people when I was in undergraduate and grad school, reading Philip K. Dick stuff and being like, oh man, it's so cosmic. It's so cool. You got to read this stuff. It's got philosophy in it. And it was always these kind of hippy dippy sorts that I didn't like. And so if they were going to recommend it, and I understand there's a foolish line of reasoning, I'd be like, well, if they're into it, it's probably crap, right? And so I would see Philip K. Dick at bookstores, and especially at the Rosetta News bookstore. They had a whole shelf of his novels. I've done a video about Rosetta News and Sig Nygaard that you can look up. That was an important part of my grad school life. And so I was just like, yeah, people who are into Dick are stupid. I don't want to have anything to do with them. And then a friend of mine who is an English grad student, I was hanging out at his place. I think we were doing a reading group on Roland Barthes or something like that. And he actually had The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. And he said, do you want this? Because I don't like it. I can't stand this crap. And so I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And I took his book, and then I went home, and I think I put it on the shelf for a while. And then one day I got it down and I started reading through it. And I was like, wow, man, this is good. This is great stuff. I actually kind of like this. And then it just kind of, stayed there in the back of my mind. So, that must have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then fast forward to 2008, I've moved down to Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I live about 5-6 blocks from the main library. And I'm totally on my own. My family's up in Indiana. I'm teaching at Fayetteville State University, and I'm kind of, bored and lonely. Things are not going well at the university. It was one of the most dysfunctional places I ever saw or worked at, and I've seen quite a few. And I would go to the library, and that was kind of a refuge of normalcy for me. And I'm, looking through like the science fiction stacks, and I saw one of those a couple Library of America volumes, and it'll say like 4 novels from the 1960s, 5 novels from the 1970s. And so I opened, one of them up. Is the one that starts with the Martian time slip and has Dr. Blood Money. And what else is in it? It doesn't really matter. So I got one of those out, and I was like, I liked Philip K. Dick before. Let me try some more of his stuff. And I started reading those, and I read through Martian Time Slip over the course of an afternoon. And I was like, oh, I got to read more of this stuff. This guy is really good. And I just kept, reading and reading and reading. And I read my way through all of those volumes, and then started looking around for what else there is of Philip K. Dick. And, then I became a dickhead, which is what fans of Philip K. Dick are called. So, I misjudged him at the start. The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep was kind of the deciding one for me. So, all right. Any other questions, comments, observations, either about Dick or this particular story and its themes? I'm kind of curious. So let me ask you 2 questions. If you were Jill, would you have lied about your spouse, who is an alien and is supposed to be eliminated, but who's way, way better than your spouse was? And then the second one, if you were Frank and what's going on, would you have, seeing how happy your sister and your son are with this new Lester, would you have done your duty to turn him in and eliminate him? or would you have been more lenient? So, what do you think? Those of you who are watching this, I mean, I think myself, I suspect if I were Frank, I might have been tempted to to not turn him in, but then I would have turned him in. But if I was the spouse herself, or we could switch it around, himself, and I had I'd lived with them for almost 5 years, really jerky person who doesn't get along with me, and then they were replaced. And it doesn't have to be necessarily an alien. It could be, a Dixian, uh, uh, replicant or android. It could be, I don't know, possession by a spirit. It could be whatever you want. I think I'd probably say, good riddance to bad garbage. I'm happy with this person. So, what would the rest of you say? I'm kind of curious. It's a great question that maybe reveals something about our mindset or morality or our points of view. Does anybody want to weigh in about that? In the meantime, while I'm waiting to see if anybody writes something, I'll just mention that we do these every month when I can get to it, and I really enjoy going back and trying to read these stories. It's a bit of a challenge to come up with different voices because I'm not like a voice actor kind of guy. I have a one child cat who would be really really good at this because they do a lot of voice work and have studied accents in college and things like that. All right, so Red Violet says this is a dry answer, but I would want more context about the society, like how easy or socially acceptable it is to get divorced or what the economic pressures are. So I mean, it looks like it's a post scarcity kind of society where quite a few of Dick's short stories and even some novels wind up being set. And it looks like it's pretty easy to get divorced too. So I imagine it's probably in that respect fairly similar to contemporary American society, except maybe it's not as expensive, resource destroying to get divorced. It takes you sometimes a long time. I had a classmate who, and this is years ago, probably more than 10 years ago, she walked in on her husband of over 20 years, who she had, I think, 3 kids with, in their house, in their bed, having sex with somebody else. I think she like came home unexpectedly or something. And so she decided to divorce him. And he was a jerk. So he went scorched earth and like contested every single thing. They wound up having to sell the house rather than one of them getting to keep it because he ran up something like $100,000 in legal bills, and she ended up having to run up like $60,000. So there went the house. And a lot of people will do that sort of thing. So, all right, Vadisgrad reminds me of the Nazi question when people talk about Kant's categorical imperative. Haven't read Kant, so I don't know. I mean, Kant would, you're thinking about the lying about Jews. Kant doesn't have Nazis, obviously, but he has, a murderer says, I want to know where your friend is so I can kill them. Kant doesn't actually say that he says you can't lie, but that doesn't mean that you have to tell the person the truth, right? You can just be silent. You can allow them to deceive themselves. So, and this isn't really a Nazi society. We do have people in the story who are, you might say, rather gleeful about getting rid of these Rex Norians, right? Lester seems to, enjoy killing things, including cats and guinea pigs and rabbits. The What did they call that ministry? The uh, Douglas is the clearance guys. They seem kind of into it, killing those dirty Rexnorians, but there's nothing that kind of implies that we're in a totalitarian society like that of the Nazis, or a racist society like that either. So yeah, I don't know about that one. Any other responses about this particular question? I don't see any. So maybe we'll start wrapping up, unless anybody else has some ideas that they want to share. We'll do another of these next month. I haven't quite picked out what story I want to read next, but I'm kind of gravitating towards another Graham Greene story, an author who I particularly like. But it will undoubtedly do some more Philip K. Dick, probably some more H.P. Lovecraft down the line. Um, Ursula K. Le Guin. It's just a matter of finding the stories that I want to particularly focus on. So, all right. I don't see any other comments. I'll just say thanks to everybody for your comments, and hope you enjoyed this. And we'll do more of these down the line in the future. So I'll see all of you, and see you next time.